Matthew Niermann, welcome to the program. I was very taken by the study that you released, and by you, I should say, Institute for Great Commission Research at California Baptist University, called Missional Imagination: How the Next Generation Understands Missions. And in fact, I was so taken by it that I've already written about it. But I realized in the process of writing that uh, I wanted to know more. So thanks for being on the program. I'm
Yeah,
grateful.
thanks for having me today, Warren. Much appreciated.
One of the things that sort of jumped out me about this study was that younger people, and by young people, you guys focused on how are y'all divided? Is it Gen Z? Is kind of the way y'all
Yeah,
are identifying that more or
it's
less?
roughly we're saying 18 to 30-year-olds. And for some context, these are all what we consider very engaged Protestant Christians. So they self-identify as a Christian, they go to church every week, they actually participate in church outside of church itself and other programs. Yeah, these are very engaged Protestant Christians.
And one of the things that you found out was that they care about missions. They're concerned about missions. They have not walked away from the Great Commission. Can you say more about that? Do I have that right?
Yeah, you have that right, and you are probably already even underplayed it. This is one of the biggest findings of this report. This is a demographic match across the United States of these engaged Protestant Christians. And these young Christians, by far, with great enthusiasm, say missions is important. We're talking 86% of all these respondents say missions is a top priority for the church. And even more so, Warren, when you ask them, how do you feel about your generation? Is it important to your generation? Is it a priority for your generation? The vast, vast majority say this is a major priority for our generation.
The other findings that I also thought was interesting, though, and would like for you to say more about that, is that while these young Christians are faithful to the Great Commission, they understand the importance of it, they define faithfulness perhaps in different ways than previous generations did. Again, am I getting you right? Am I reading the data right? And can you say more about that?
Yeah, that's essentially why we call this report missional imagination. And we have this major emphasis of this younger generation saying missions matter to us. The Great Commission matters to our generation. But if you just pause at that moment and say, wonderful, what do we actually mean by this? And this is where the report gets really interesting. We found that there are really four different ways that the youth mean when they say we're really important. Admissions is very important. Great Commission is really important. And we can unpack that as we move forward. But there are essentially four different missional imaginations that drive the motivation, the participation, the value checking, the initiation of missions for this generation.
Well, but, I can't resist. What are the four?
Yeah,
How are they
yeah.
different?
We've certainly titled them differently just to help throughout the conversation. We have four different groups. We have the faithful supporters, we have the credibility conscious, the service oriented, and the mobilized optimists would be the four that we call them. And if we take a minute just to kind of describe a little bit how these are different, the faithful supporters, you can think about this as people who view missions and their participation as supportive and sacrificial. They like to see institutional, they like to see longevity, they like to support the church. They're maybe not the first to go, if you will, but they're willing to sacrifice, give money, they're hopeful, prayerful, and want to see missions carry on. The second group, the credibility conscious, are ones who are very aware of current realities in our world, very aware of the history of missions, if you will, that perhaps a European plays a certain different kind of role now in international missions, or American plays a different kind of role in international missions, and want to be very careful with that. So they're very motivated by partnership and integrity, still following a biblical command, but they want to make sure that there are local partnerships. They want to make sure that the credibility is right, and they're rightfully conscious and concerned about that. The service oriented, it kind of rings in the title there. They're motivated by the service and mercy side of the Great Commission. They want to share Jesus's love. They have a sense that there's so much need in the world that this is what compels us to go. And then the fourth one is arguably what the evangelical Protestant church most thinks of, these mobilized optimists, right? They're motivated by adventure and obedience to the Great Commission. They want to reach the unreached. They want some actionable plan. They want to go. They want to see it done. They're excited by this. They're inspired by it, and they want to spread the gospel to those who haven't heard.
So, Matthew, let me ask about those four groups. Are they, I would assume that if we had a whiteboard here and you were drawing circles, that there might be some overlap. I mean, if we were, creating some sort of a Venn diagram, I mean, these are not necessarily mutually exclusive groups, I would guess, number one. And number two, are they more or less equal? I mean, are they 25% in all four boxes or all four squares, or does one predominate?
This is one of the more fascinating pieces of the research when we conducted it. There is not a massive demographic reality underneath this. There's not females from a certain denomination or church or males of a certain age. It's really quite equal across. There's no predictive gender or age or political leaning even that separates these. There are people on all sides of the political spectrum in each one of these. And it's really more equal than you would imagine within the church or within this population. About 39% are mobilized optimists, 23% are faithful supporters, 20% are service-oriented, and 18% are credibility conscious. So much more equal than one might imagine across the spectrum.
One of the things that struck me about the credibility conscious group is that is something that we've been writing about here at MinistryWatch for a while. It's something that I've been calling the new paradigm of ministries. I mean, I don't know that I originated that term, and I don't even know if it's the right term to use for this group, but it is a sort of a philosophy of missions that takes into account the history of missions, which is something that you mentioned, a while ago. And sometimes the way I describe it, Matthew, and I'm just wondering if you think I'm on the right track here, is that,
sure.
In the 18th and 19th century, a lot of Europeans and Americans went sacrificially to the far corners of the world, and they evangelized and they saw some fruit. But now in the 21st century, you go to places like India or Africa or Asia, places that were unreached people groups 100 years ago, and you find fourth generation Presbyterian pastors or,
right.
third generation Assemblies of God pastors or, fifth generation Baptist preachers there. And they're faithful, they're well educated, they're godly men and women. And I'm seeing a shift. I think I noticed that you said the credibility conscious. You said all four groups were more or less equal, but the credibility conscious group was only 18%, which is probably a little bit smaller than I think, if I'm remembering right, the others.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if we might be seeing that grow in the years ahead. That there might be a growing recognition that one of the best ways to reach the nations is to support the people who are already there and already faithful and already engaged in ministry. Am I on the right track here, or are you seeing that in the data?
Yeah, you're on the right track, but even more so to your point. Certainly, the credibility conscious are aware of the history of missions and potential new ways and existing new ways to carry out missions.
Yep.
But one of the more important things in the study is when asking youth, 18 to 20-year-olds, I'm sorry, let's try that again. One of the more important findings of the study, when you're asking 18 to 30-year-olds, what is the most effective method of missions? What should be the highest priorities? What is a way that feels best to you to carry out missions? We asked these in 4 or 5 different ways. By far, across all the different missional imaginations, the number one way of doing missions by 18 to 30-year-olds was partnering with local Christians to reach their local context. Yeah. So this was not just isolated to credibility conscious missional imagination. This is across all the missional imaginations. Specifically, every time we asked, partnering with local Christians to reach the local context is the best way, the most effective way, the most exciting way, the way that people feel most right about missions right now is that. approach.
Well, I could see, Matthew, how these data could be very helpful to missiologists, to missions organizations, to church leaders who want to engage young people. I could also see how it's important in shaping or maybe even reshaping the way churches and missions organizations are doing uh, ministry, because not only do they need to reach these young people, there will come a time in the not too distant future when they'll depend on these young people who will now be middle aged and older for financial support. I mean, they're
Yeah.
right now, a lot of these kids that are responding to your study are paying student loans and trying to buy their first house. But in 20 years, they're going to become a donor class for
Mhm.
Christian ministries. And so I can see how, these data could really be helpful in helping plot a long-term strategy. What else can we use this data for? What do you think is important about these data, especially for those of us in the church, maybe even in leadership roles in churches, who are um, trying to envision a future for fruitful missions here in this country?
Yeah, great question. The closing chapter in this report talks about rethinking missions mobilization. If we are simply recruiting people and mobilizing people to missions in a certain way of understanding missions, what this report shows is we're missing three-quarters of the youth. We need to really understand these four different missional imaginations and speak those languages specifically to them to mobilize them better. Let me just take a second here and read one of the little charts, I think is helpful. We go into great depth on how to mobilize all the four of these imagination types, but let me just read this. When we ask, is mission faithful? Is this mission faithful? And any mission there. Pastors now often assume that they need to express more urgency or more vision there. But what actually the data is showing that it's the faithfulness and integrity are the primary filters for 18 to 30-year-olds.
Hmm.
When we ask, is my role appropriate in these missions? Pastors are often assuming they want clearer roles or training, but really the data is showing they want to know if the participation is legitimate or not. Right? These are you can see these are questions we're not quite hitting with our current generation. If we
Right.
ask who should be leading missions, pastors now are often assuming missions should be led by those who are sent. But all of the data is showing that trust is highest when local Christians lead. When we ask, how should I participate? Pastors are often assuming going is the clearest sign of commitment. If you're committed to missions, you go. But all this data is showing that supporting, sustaining, and partnering are really this primary form of participation, the first form of participation for these folks. And when asking when is it right to act in missions, pastors are often assuming now is better than later, where the data is actually showing timing is morally discerned and not assumed. So this is just a short chart of many of the charts we have, beginning to show that our baseline assumptions of how to mobilize in missions has shifted, has changed generally with this generation, but very specifically within the four different imaginations.
Now, Matthew, I know the purpose of your study wasn't necessarily to pick winners and losers in the missions arena, but I am wondering, are you seeing signs of life? Are you seeing missions organizations or denominations? I mean, you're at California Baptist University, and is that an SBC
It is.
college? Yeah. So you've got the International Missions Board of the Southern Baptist Convention that is that is part of your ecosystem. Um, you've got in the Presbyterian world, PCA world, there's the Mission to the World. There's dozens of large missions organizations and Bible translation organizations that put missionaries all over the world. What would you say to these people? What would you say to the? You could give them one bit. I've imagined that I've got them aggregated, and you've got 90 seconds to say this one thing you need to pay attention to, or you will be in big trouble in 10 or 15 or 20 years. What would that be?
I would start with a reminder to us all, a sober reminder that all it takes is one generation to forget, to fail to mobilize, to fail to carry out the Great Commission before the entire Great Commission is in trouble. And so when we begin to look to this next generation, and we want to be faithful and steward this next generation. I want to be celebratory. This generation, as far as I've seen, is far more motivated, interested, and ready to participate in the Great Commission than generations we've seen in the past. That's amazing. But Warren, we have to recognize that their imagination of missions, the questions they're asking, how they're engaging, what they're prioritizing, what they're finding faithful has shifted. So if we continue to try and mobilize, to try and motivate, to try and send the way that we have over the last 10 to 15 years, we are in danger of falling to failing the next generation and mobilizing them in a way that we could lose a whole generation.
Yeah. Final question for me, Matthew, even though I am going to give you an opportunity to, maybe wrap this up into a bow here at the end, but
Sure.
um, is this the first time y'all done this study? Do you plan to do it again and maybe compare the data and see what shifted?
Yeah, I think it would be amazing to do a longitudinal study or even carry out the study with a generation older to do a comparative study with that to see how the different generations are understanding the missional imagination. This study was a bit of an exploratory study, but it came out with so many ripe results and such important information. It is a foundational study, I would argue, and a keystone study for missions world today.
Yeah. Well, final question is just to say anything I'm not smart enough to ask you, Matthew, or anything that I mean, we said a lot. Is there something
Yep.
that you want to make sure doesn't get lost in the mix, or like I say, something that I didn't ask you that you want to make sure that that you tell our listeners today?
Yeah, certainly. Uh, I think there's an observation in our contemporary American culture that we very instinctually say missions are aligned with these external realities. How people understand missions are aligned with denominational leanings or political leanings or gender or region. And the reality is there's a heart that God has put in people for missions, and that appears to be shaped in a way where there are natural leanings, what we're calling these missional imaginations. There in the report, it'll show different kinds of training that leads to some of that. But we recognize that there's a diversity in how people understand missions, and in many ways, they're all faithful. And so to narrow ourselves to say, well, this is the only one way missions can happen, we need to remove our understanding of missions from this external environment that we often relate it to, and recognize that there's a heart for missions in a variety of ways that we can mobilize and speak to for the Great Commission.
Excellent. Matthew Niermann, Institute for Great Commission Research, IGCR. I'm going to get used to saying that. At California Baptist University. Really grateful for this new study, Missional Imagination, how the next generation understands missions. And I'm grateful for your time today. It's been very helpful for me. I'm grateful. Blessings.
Thanks, Martin. Appreciate it.